In Anishinaabe, or Ojibwe as some people know it, mythology, this earth in North America was created on the back of a turtle. That's why we call it Turtle Island. The earth was brought up from the floor of the sea during a great flood which covered the earth by a muskrat and created all of this beauty that we see around us today. The area I'm standing on is one of a number of features that glaciologists attribute to the Ice Age, another great event in the Earth's history. This area behind me is known as the Hog's Back, and it is an esker deposited by sand and river action beneath the glacier some 12,000 years ago. It's one of the hottest, driest, most exposed parts of the entire savanna, which you can tell if you can hear the wind in the background. So it's natural history from that mythology, and with the use of fire by native peoples many years ago, has created this extravagance of nature. Hello, and welcome to Alderville First Nation. We're working on an ecological program here for the restoration of an endangered habitat. So follow me and we'll talk with some of the good people and the work that they do here. This is Bicknell's frostweed, one of the rarer plants that's indicative of the prairie savanna in prime condition. This plant will actually bloom underground, which has enabled it to survive fires. When we see this plant, we know we're looking at a site that has all the characteristics we're looking for in a well-maintained, healthy prairie savanna environment. And this flashy character, butterfly milkweed, this is a deeper orange variety of it, indicator of prairie or savanna, good condition, likes open sun, very drought tolerant, has a root 5 or 6 feet deep. It's also called pleurisy root, which gives you some idea of its medicinal qualities. Very good as an expectorant, healer of the linings of the lungs, and also host to the endangered monarch butterfly now. This is wild bergamot, a plant traditionally used for seasoning meats and also as a healer of skin damage, wounds, cuts, etc. Has a wonderful aroma, much like oregano. Beautiful flower, provides food for butterflies, and in this restoration, you're now at 8 years old, corn oat field, now big blue stem, this plant and the woodland sunflower as well.
We're often asked what's the benefit to the community, and we're very grateful to have our natural heritage coordinator, who is also our education coordinator. So we do host numerous education events for all the way from K to university level. We're thankful and fortunate to be fairly close in proximity to numerous university and colleges. So several aspects of that are very beneficial, not just for ourselves and our knowledge of the site, but again for the greater good of what they'll determine based on that research. And culturally, quite frankly, there's a very spirited event every September. It's called Prairie Days. We're in our 3rd year of that event, and it draws between 200 and 300 people. Certainly on a biological level, we're dealing with, although it's a significant acreage and hectares set aside, about 50 again hectares, it's still a relatively small site. So we deal with kind of not necessarily an island effect where it's just us. The surrounding area, the surrounding adjacent properties do have some of the desirable species that we want. However, we have a lot of undesirable species, including non-native and exotic species that have moved in, and it really requires a lot of work to stay on top of that. They're abundant in terms of producing seed and basically overrunning the site.
So invasive species are probably the second greatest threat to biodiversity. These invaders arrive into our waters or our forests, and they outcompete our native species for food or for habitat. Often they're very aggressive, and they have just a much better ability to outcompete these species.
Certainly an invasive alien species is a species that is foreign to a particular ecosystem, and it hasn't been integrated into the web of life, meaning that it doesn't, it can be overly aggressive, it can disturb the balance.
There are two kinds of invasive species, basically, from point of view of classification. One came in from afar, usually from Europe or some other part of the world. Another one that came in from other part of North America. Once this land here was cleared of forests, all kinds of species moved in here. Birds, animals, plants have just invaded this area as weeds and as what's called alien species. In other words, they don't, as opposed to those that have been here for thousands of years.
Invasive plants can affect a whole ecosystem when they move in. A place that had native plants there, if an invasive plant starts taking over, they're outcompeting the native plants, so affecting the soil, taking away the native plants that other insects and birds could use for food and habitat, and that overall is starting to affect the biodiversity of the area and completely altering that ecosystem into something.
My parents were both very interested in the outdoors. We camped as children, swam in the creeks, looked at birds, caught frogs, did all those things that, at least in my day, was very common activity for children. As I grew older, I became to a point where I could appreciate and understand what was around me, and I could understand the importance that it meant not only to me, but to the health of others, other people, as well as to the rest of the land. I'm very concerned about the future. I think there are very serious consequences that we're going to be looking at as a result of the decline of biological diversity, in part spurred by invasive species. My greatest concern is that we are losing resiliency. And the reason that resiliency is so important is that if a particular organism comes under attack, if it doesn't have the capacity to respond to that attack, it falls into decline. As we lose both biological diversity as well as cultural diversity, that is different ways of looking at the world, different ideas that people might have about the way that the world works, about the role of species, our connection to them, then we lose our resilience, not only our physical resilience, but our resiliency of ideas and knowledge. I think it is important for our society as a whole to recognize this concept of interconnectedness, because of the impact that the decline of one species can have on everything and everyone. It's an idea that is increasingly gaining awareness and understanding outside of the Aboriginal community, and I think in some part it's as a result of the work of Indigenous people, of finding their voice again and having this opportunity to influence policy and decision makers.
Wild rice is really important to our people because it was used as a staple food. They'd come to Rice Lake from well over 100 miles each fall to gather, canoe loads of rice, and then they would paddle back to their communities. Probably planted and tended by native people just the same way as we're doing today. They would transfer seed around from one lake to another lake, see how it works out. So about for the past 4 years now, we've been working on restoring this creek to where it once was by adding wild rice into this southern section here. And so every fall we go up into the northern Kawarthas and we gather as much as we can, bring it down, and we started planting it. We could see that it was doing just fine right off the bat, so we just kept adding seed. Every year we bring in maybe another 100 pounds or so, and we just keep seeding it down. So you can see it's doing fairly well. There's a little bed not too far from us, just at the side of the canoe here now. And the whole creek out in behind us here is starting to come a little bit. It's great habitat for certainly the muskrat. You'll see where the geese and ducks have grazed it off. One of the problems we're having is with the common carp. It's an invasive species introduced in the Great Lakes in the late 1800s and eventually worked its way right through the Kawartha system. And it's real heavy in this area in Rice Lake, so we had to find a way to try to keep them out of here.
The zebra mussel has had major impacts on our native clam species. In the lower Great Lakes, I think we have over 9 species of native clams, and many of those are declining or disappearing because of the introduction of the zebra mussel. I know this just from being a child, growing up on Lake Ontario. I remember collecting clams on the shores of Lake Ontario in the Kingston area, and today I would not be able to find those clams. I would only find zebra mussels. And it takes something really tangible that I remember as a child that has now disappeared in my lifetime. When zebra mussel arrives in a lake, they're a filter feeder, so they filter the water. A lot of people think that zebra mussels clean the water because they see when zebra mussels arrive that the water becomes a lot clearer. They can see a lot further down into the lake than they would have before. But what zebra mussels are actually doing is by filter feeding, they're removing phytoplankton or algae from the water, and that's a very important food source for the rest of the species within the lake ecosystem. So when zebra mussels invade, that increased water clarity causes increased plant growth. Because of that extra light, more plants grow, and it's a problem for swimmers, for recreational boaters, certainly. But as well, the increased plant growth, the increased water clarity changes the lake habitat. So fish species, for example, that are very light sensitive, like walleye, will tend to move out of traditional areas where they used to be because they don't like that extra light into deeper and darker waters.
Okay, so this is a rusty crayfish, one of the invasive species in the Stony Creek area of Rice Lake. Probably put here by fishermen. It's a popular area for fishing, so what usually happens is they just get done fishing and they just dump the bait buckets into the water. And I think that's probably how they got here. When I emptied a minnow trap up this way, there was about 20 of them in there, but we're just fortunate enough today to catch one. It looks like it is from those rusty patches along the side there. Now, of all the ones I've found in this creek, I've never found a native species here in the last few years. They've all been this rusty colored crayfish, so they've pretty much taken over this area.
One of the characteristics of abandoned sites on Disturbed is that they're prime ground for the invasion of non-native species. One of the biggest offenders here, and in many other sites, is spotted knapweed, an invader from Eurasia. Care must be exercised. I recommend using gloves in handling this plant because it's a known carcinogen. The technique for removal at the point when you have gloves on is to simply grab a hold of the plant and forcibly remove it from the ground. You can see what we have in the understory of some of these invasive plants. This is a woodland sunflower, a species adapted to savannas and prairies. Releasing this plant by pulling out the invasives creates more sunshine, increases the nutrients, and so that this plant will thrive.
Yeah, so that's our carp gate, or our carp fence that we installed here, I guess 3 years ago. We put the gate down, and right away the beavers took full advantage of that. They come down here and they really blocked this creek up. It was really easy for them with all that steel there. So a friend, the partial landowner here, could see the water level rising from his house. So he called us and he said, you better come down here and get that gate raised, or the road's going to be flooded here in no time. So we had to come down and raise it up and just let the beavers do his thing, because he had a beaver dam in it that was like filled half the culvert. So the carp couldn't get through anyway. So we just left it up from then on. The carp population is down now anyways, and they don't seem to be able to get through this culvert as good as they used to. And I think the beaver dams have got them stopped further downstream, so we're not getting the big numbers that we used to have in here. It used to be like probably 300-400 of them come in here. Now I think we're down to maybe 20.
The OFAH, in partnership with many other organizations, got involved in the mid-90s with the purple loosestrife biological control program, which means the use of a leaf-eating beetle to control purple loosestrife. And that program, which involved over 400 releases of these leaf-eating beetles across the province, has been extremely successful in controlling invasive purple loosestrife across the province.
Here's a loosestrife, you can see, which has been attacked by a little beetle, and you can see the brown spots on the leaves, and those have the juice has been sucked out by the beetle. I don't see a beetle right now, but I think if we search a little more, we'll find one. I noticed the flower is gone too. Flower, so this loosestrife is not reproducing the seeds.
One thing people may not know is how their equipment might be spreading invasive plant seeds or parts. So ATVs or mountain bikes, things like that. Even your dog running through the bush can spread seed to a new area. So really important to clean off any equipment before going into another area. We're trying to engage people who maybe haven't been talked to in the past about spreading invasive species. ATVers, mountain bikers, horseback riders.
I would say that one of the most important things that a person can do is to get involved with the restoration and protection of areas of nature. Personally, get involved.
The best thing for the public to do is to become aware of what invasive plants are in their area. So find out through our website, ontarioinvasiveplants.ca, or the OFAH website, invadingspecies.com. That way they'll know what they look like and how to avoid from spreading them, that kind of thing.
Canadian environmental law can do much more to prevent the widespread distribution of invasive species. I think that the gardening industry, the ornamental fish industry needs much more control. They are introducing species without being aware of what the consequences are if they escape into the wild, and they're selling these things and they're being used in situations where they can escape into the wild. So I think that there's a big gap in Canadian law, but it's not just one environmental law that we need to correct the problem. It's across the board, and again, I think that this picks up this notion of interconnectedness, that our legal system also has to look at the world from an interconnected whole.
I think it's important to understand that invasive alien species are one of the most critical issues to protecting our biodiversity. And it's our biodiversity that provides us with life. No biodiversity, no us. Simple as that. And invasive alien species are one of the most significant threats to that biodiversity. Invasive alien species cost Canada in a variety of ways, literally billions of dollars.
I think it's just 16 invaders have cost up to $34 billion annually to the Canadian economy. So it's a huge, huge economic cost.
One might anticipate an answer that was more science, but my answer isn't. My answer is actually more about culture. And so I think, for me, I think about the ceremonies, the teaching stories around understanding our relationship to nature. And our relationship is that we are part of nature. We're not, we're not set apart from nature.
She is the vein of our mother. All this goes to the ocean, to big rivers. Just like the human being. You got arteries, big, they're small ones, same life as the human being. That's why we call Mother Earth, we call us Indians. We're not Indians, really. We were living in Turtle Island.
What we require is a reconciliation between the cultures in Canada, between French and English, as well as with all of the many Indigenous cultures that exist in Canada, the Métis, the Inuit, and the vast number of First Nations cultures that exist in Canada. And by reconciliation, I mean the definition of the word, which is to become friends again. And I think that the Indigenous and non-Indigenous community in Canada need to become friends again, as we once were, so that we can share our knowledge and experience across cultural boundaries, so that Indigenous people feel welcome and part of the Federation of Canada, and that their knowledge, ideas, innovations, practices, their relationship with the environment, with the world, is captured in decision making. And so that means reconciling our laws, reconciling our governments, and reconciling our personal views on how to engage, how to relate to the environment around us.